Brian Lewerke's 2017 season was one of the best an MSU quarterback has ever had. As one of the most interception-averse quarterbacks in program history, with an excellent run game to boot, he was one of 7 players named a Heisman dark horse at the beginning of the 2018 season by the Associated Press. The season he would go on to have in 2018 was not of Heisman caliber, or even starting caliber, really. What happened last year? And which version of Brian Lewerke are we going to see this year? To really understand how bad his 2018 year was, let's compare it to his 2017 season, the one that made him a Heisman dark horse. Let's start with looking at Lewerke's yards per attempt in the 2 seasons. Yards per attempt, for those unfamiliar with the stat, does a good job measuring how effective a quarterback is by looking at how much yardage his team gains every time he throws the ball, not every time he completes a pass. This takes incompletions into account, which is an important thing to look at when you're evaluating a quarterback. After all, it's harder to score when you aren't completing passes to move the ball down the field, or when the passes you are completing don't go very far. Last season, Lewerke's yards per attempt dropped from 6.7 to 6, which is pretty substantial. Looking at where the drop came from, most of it comes down to a drop in completion percentage, from 59% to 54.3. There are other places to look for reasons, though, like an increase in checkdown passes. Instead of throwing the ball downfield to his deep threat wide receivers, Lewerke spent a lot of time throwing to his running backs. In 2017, running backs caught 37 passes all season. Last year, in 2018, running back Connor Hayward caught 32 passes on his own, making him MSU's 3rd leading receiver in terms of receptions. Running backs L.J. Scott and Ladarius Jefferson added 10 and 7 receptions, respectively, for a total of 49 receptions for MSU's running backs on the year. Now, granted, some of those receptions were on passes coming from Lewerke's backup, Rocky Lombardi. Why was Rocky Lombardi throwing passes, you ask? Right. Brian Lewerke played the second half of this season with an undisclosed shoulder injury that was reportedly causing him pain as he threw. Why was he playing through an injury like this? Your guess is as good as mine. But what is certain is that it hampered his ability to throw the ball downfield, throw the ball accurately, and throw the ball in general. Lewerke injured his shoulder in the game against Penn State on October 13th, which meant that he couldn't practice Monday through Thursday in the following week leading up to the Michigan game. How'd that work out? Lewerke went 5 of 25 for 66 yards with no picks and no touchdowns. MSU did score 1 touchdown on the day, though, on a U of M fumble that gave the Spartans 1st and goal from the 7. MSU then proceeded to score on a passing touchdown from wide receiver Darrell Stewart, caught by Brian Lewerke. 5 of 25 is just not what we had come to expect from Lewerke, and after this game, head coach Mark D'Antonio didn't even know what was happening. I didn't know whether he was off, dinged up, or what, D'Antonio said. Well, it's tough to be a quarterback without a working shoulder, but at least he had a good supporting cast around him all season, right? No. In just their 3rd game of the season, the Spartans were already down 2 talented receivers, in Cam Chambers and Darrell Stewart Jr. By the time they played Penn State, their 5th game, Chambers had returned, but in addition to missing Stewart Jr., wideout Cody White had broken his hand, and talented freshman Jalen Naylor had an unknown injury. On top of all this, star receiver Felton Davis III suffered a mid-game hip injury, but would still return to catch a game-winning touchdown with 19 seconds left. As the receiving corps was falling apart, so was the offensive line. By the Penn State game, both of the Spartans' starting guards had suffered injuries that had kept them out for about a month. Then Lewerke's shoulder got hurt. Now we're back to the Spartans' rivalry game against Michigan, and there isn't a lot to work with. The already injured but still playing Felton Davis III then tears his Achilles, leaving the MSU offense completely barren. This left a receiving corps featuring 3 slot receivers, Stewart, Chambers, and Sowards, and a cornerback. Yeah, MSU had to resort to, in multiple games, using Justin Lane as a 2-way cornerback receiver. We'd have to move past this U of M game because it just hurts to talk about. On to the Purdue game, where it honestly starts to make sense why backup quarterback Rocky Lombardi would see the field. Lombardi started and led the Spartans to a 23-13 win, throwing for 318 yards and 2 touchdowns to the tune of chance of his name. But good things never last, and Lewerke came back to start against Maryland and threw for just 87 yards and an interception. Should that have been an indicator that Brian Lewerke wasn't healthy enough to start a game? Probably. But he came back to start against Ohio State anyway, only to promptly pull himself in the second quarter. The quarterback switch did nothing to help the Spartans' chances of beating Ohio State, leading to a miserable 26-6 defeat. Finally, at this point, Lewerke was done for the regular season, with the Spartans finishing with a poor start from Lombardi against Nebraska, and a better but still questionable start against Rutgers. The Spartans then rolled into the Red Box Bowl, with a reportedly slightly healthier Lewerke ready to go. How'd that go? 7-6 Oregon. You mean the Spartans held Oregon's 25th ranked offense to 7 points and still lost? Yep. Lewerke threw for 172 yards and an interception against Oregon, with no touchdowns. Speaking of interceptions, let's look at Lewerke's interception numbers from both years. In 2017, he threw for 7 picks, and it jumps to 11 in 2018. So he did throw more in 2018, but what's really concerning is that he did it in fewer attempts. If we look at his interception rate in both seasons, you can see it balloons to double what it was in the year prior, 3.2%, up from 1.6%. So not only was Lewerke less effective at moving the ball downfield for his own team, but he was putting it into the hands of his opponents nearly twice as often. Remember that yards per attempt stat from earlier? Let's look at Lewerke's yards per attempt in every game he played after his injury against Penn State. Yikes. As bad as that looks, it gives me hope for how Lewerke will look this year. Let's look at Lewerke's pre-injury yards per attempt stats from last year. Now, I understand that these defenses are not the same caliber as the ones that gave Lewerke problems later in the year, but the sharp drop-off at the Michigan game makes me think that this is an injury problem, not a Lewerke problem. Want more proof? Let's look at Lewerke's early 2017 starts against Bowling Green State and Western Michigan. If you ask me, the jump from high 7 to high 8 is even development. In my book, Lewerke didn't regress as a passer last year. He was developing until his team fell apart with injuries around him, and then he had his own injuries. Now, there is one thing I left out. Lewerke forgot he had legs last year. I think. That has to be the only explanation for it, because Lewerke only rushed for more than 50 yards in a game once last year, against Oregon for 63. This is a quarterback who rushed for 559 yards the year before, and only accrued 184 in 2018. That's steep. The only explanation I have for this is that Lewerke was playing with a handicapped offensive line all season, which made it harder to run and made him more vulnerable to sacks, which count against his rushing yards. But I don't think that should account for 375 missing rushing yards, should it? Football's complicated, man.